I figured that being a Disney historian, just a review is not enough for me and my little history brain. And I like to know the history of things. It often gives context as to the time, as to the circumstances that created these films. And I think the main reason I chose to do this is Snow White has so much history behind it and so many things behind it that I think that I could not just put it on a tier list without giving some context as to why and as to how powerful this thing is. And I think I just wanted to do research on these movies for fun because I have watched videos, Yesterworld, Defunctland, anybody else who has made videos on specific movies and the history of movies. And I'll be honest, they go a little bit in depth than I am probably going to, but I am going to go in depth. And I have some facts that other people might be like, I knew that, And I do that in videos too, where like people will be like, fun facts about this. And I'm like, I knew that. But there is some stuff in here that even I didn't know, or there's some things that I thought I knew, but it's actually was like a misconception thing. And so if in the future I want to make a more in-depth video about this, I will. But the history that I have right now and the little facts that I have are very important and special to me. So Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs premiered on December 21st, 1937 at the Carthay Circle Theater in Los Angeles. And a fun fact about this premiere is that they had the first costume versions of Mickey and Minnie, which at the time were basically just blown up versions of the dolls, which is really interesting. But if you're like a Disney park costume nerd, then this is really cool. A lot of the evolution videos about the park's costumes, normally they start at the Snow White premiere because the first Mickey and Minnie costumes were at the Snow White premiere. There were also little people portraying the dwarfs. They kind of got into some little trouble because apparently there was alcohol for them and food where they were like above the sign, and apparently they got into a little trouble because they got drunk. If you want to know a little bit more about that, I know that it's either Yesterworld or Defunctland has a video on that where they talk about that in a little bit more in depth about the premiere of Snow White. So the Disney classic, of course, was based on the famous Grimm's Brothers fairy tale of the same name. The Grimm's Brothers fairy tale is actually called Snow White instead of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. It is the first full-length animated feature film produced in the United States, as well as the first cel animated film. A cel animated film is where they take every single frame is hand-drawn, and it is incredible. So Snow White was referred to as Walt's Folly by many, the public, and a lot of other studio producers because they thought that the movie would not work. The cartoon landscape at that time was really only these comedic 7 to 15 minute kind of bursts of laugh and gags and everything. And so people did not think that this movie would work because the cartoons at that time were very stylized in art style and writing. So examples are like Mickey Mouse, Felix the Cat, Looney Tunes, and Betty Boop. For this reason, like a realistic depiction of humans in a cartoon was thought to not be possible, as well as making it as long as a feature film, like a full-length movie. According to the Guinness Book of World Records in 2015, which I then adjusted for inflation to 2025's money, it made $248,478,450,506.05. Adjusted for inflation, this is still the highest grossing animated film of all time, which I find very impressive. And it speaks wonders to how revolutionary this movie was. This film has been praised in many different ways and by many different people and in many different outlets and avenues. And I think it earns its flowers in the fact that it is the first feature-length animated movie that has a lot of heart and seriousness to it. The film was nominated for Best Musical Score at the Oscars, and despite not winning, Walt was given honorary Oscar, and it was one large Oscar and 7 little Oscars to represent Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. And it was actually given by Shirley Temple. Right now, it just feels like I'm talking about facts, and I'm sorry, it's a jumble. We will get into more clear, concise history. I just feel that talking about its accomplishments is mandatory. The famous Oscar, which is actually not an Oscar, it's an honorary award. And so that's something that I learned that I found quite interesting, that no one had told me before. To show how influential Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs is, the film was one of the first 25 films to be chosen for preservation by the National Film Registry, which I don't know how to say, again, how important this film is to cinema and history. Now we will get into the actual history of the film itself. The idea of an animated feature film came about in 1933 when the studio was working on the Silly Symphony series of cartoons. And despite the popularity, Walt wanted to use this to expand storytelling possibilities, allowing for more plot and character development. Despite the popularity of the Silly Symphony cartoons, Walt wanted something longer to explore more story possibilities, allowing for more plot and character development within the given animation. And after the success of the Silly Symphony short, The Three Little Pigs, Walt was certain that short was very successful. And I think that understanding there can be a beginning, a middle, and an end to something, I think was very monumental for him. And I believe that could have sparked something in him to say, I want to make this longer. I want to make something where I can tell a story in a longer time frame and develop more between the plot and the characters and everything. And he was originally approached by a producer with the idea of adapting the story Babes in Toyland. And you might be saying, oh, wait, whoa. Babes in Toyland is a Disney movie. It is. This original concept was going to be a cartoon version of the film, but the rights were owned by RKO Radio Pictures, and they said no. And then Disney eventually did choose to make it live action in 1961. So that's what you're thinking of with Babes in Toyland, is you're thinking of the live action one that did eventually come out, but about 30 years later. And then he was approached with an offer to make an adaptation of the book Bambi: A Life in the Woods, but he actually rejected that idea, believing that the studio wasn't ready for the challenge, which I find interesting because I don't know anything about animation. I don't know anything about animating. I can barely draw, but I find it interesting that he was like, they aren't up for the challenge. They aren't up for the challenge of animating and hyper realistic kind of cartoony animals. So instead, we're going to make people. We're going to animate people instead, to the best of our abilities. Bambi would actually later get made by Disney. I find it interesting that he was approached initially about making the film. In spring of 1934, he finally settled on adapting Snow White. He cited the 1916 silent movie, which he saw as a teenager, as his inspiration. It was originally planned to be a silly symphony cartoon, as they had adapted multiple fairy tales at that time, like I said, The Three Little Pigs and Little Red Riding Hood, but Walt saw potential for a feature-length film. And according to the Walt Disney Family Museum, I love the Walt Disney Family Museum. If you ever get a chance to go, I would highly recommend it. I could make a whole spiel about it, but I won't. According to the Walt Disney Family Museum, in 1934, Walt Disney gathered his studio staff to a soundstage and gave a performance of Snow White to announce the plans to adapt the story. There's no record of Walt's performance, which is said to have lasted 3 hours. I personally believe that the meeting about the film lasted 3 hours, but we can't know because all we have is notes and suggestions made by artists to prove that this event happened. And I guess maybe word of mouth to prove that this event happened, but we don't exactly know what the performance was like and how it happened, because unlike anything else that would happen in the studio under Walt's run, it was not recorded. Walt was very diligent in recording meetings once the production of Snow White started. So you will find that every single meeting, or at least almost every single meeting, under Walt's direction of the company, I have no idea if it stopped after Walt had passed away or not, but almost every meeting or every single meeting is recorded. So in Saving Mr. Banks, this is my recollection of the scene where she says every meeting needs to be recorded. I think they would have done that anyway, and that it would have been recorded anyway, because I think that Walt was that way, where he would be like, go back, what was that idea that we had at yesterday's meeting? And I think it's smart. I think you should record some things at times, but all of this meeting is lost to time because it was not recorded, which is really sad, because a 3-hour meeting about the first feature film would be so interesting, but there is nothing recorded about it other than some meeting notes by some animators. There was excitement but hesitation among the company, especially Walt's wife Lillian and his brother Roy, Roy was his business partner and often was in charge of the business side of the company. He often handled the money and the financials, and so they both were very hesitant about this, kind of looking and being like, uh-oh. They knew Walt, and they knew that he was going to do whatever it took. And according to Ward Kimball, who was one of Disney's 9 Old Men, a group of original animators trusted by Walt, he said, Walt, of course, plugged ahead. He felt that if you had a solid story, not only laughs in it, but tragedy, it would go. In the earliest planned storyline that we know of for Snow White, titled the bland title of Manuscript, it was very vague, only 21 pages, featuring suggestions of characters, scenes, and even songs. Someday My Prince Will Come is in that original manuscript, which I find really interesting, that the most iconic song from the film has been there since the early concepting days. Disney had what was called a wide-ranging approach, which is essentially a there are no bad ideas mentality. He was willing to hear anything and everything for characterization, settings, scenes, anything. Because of this, there are many suggestions that ultimately did not pan out. Snow White traveling through many enchanted sights before arriving at the dwarf's cottage, Snow White being a little bit more tomboyish, which I personally can't imagine She is very dainty and fair and kind to me, which is not a problem. I love that for her. But I can't imagine a story where she is a little bit more tomboyish. And the evil queen being very composed and only showing fury in passionate scenes and kind of like a kettle a little bit. A few abandoned scenes that I find interesting are the evil queen imprisoning the prince, which got very far in development. There are some sketches, I believe, of the prince in the jail, and there was even a scene planned involving the skeletons in the dungeon, kind of like coming to life, which I find very interesting that concept and that scene would later be revisited in Sleeping Beauty. And so you wonder how many concepts or how many kind of elements that were planned for Snow White got deposited into different films later. And another abandoned scene is a Gilbert and Sullivan style musical number during the scene where the queen instructs the huntsman to kill Snow White. That is something I'm a little bit sad got left on the cutting room floor, because I am a classical music person. I love classical music, and so a Gilbert and Sullivan style musical number would be so much fun. I personally love Snow White and the classical music. I understand that's not everybody's vibe and everybody's style, but I think it's amazing. And Walt was the one to make the decision that the dwarfs needed distinct personalities. And there were over 50 possibilities concepted. My favorite names being Sneezy Weezy and Awful. I think there was also Big O Ego, which I just personally find really hilarious. I think that I'm a little bit sad that Sneezy Weezy did not pan out and that we just ended up getting Sneezy. Walt actually asked for the dwarfs to be referred to as little men, which is, I don't know if it was like a thing or if it was just a progressive thing there. I don't know if they were being referred to in many different ways, that he said we're referring to them as little men. I don't know. I don't know if it was progressive, but him asking for them to be referred to as little men, in my mind, is quite progressive. And the cast is composed of Andrea Castellotti as Snow White, who was named a Disney legend in 1992. She was actually not credited for the role. None of the voice actors were until later editions of the movie. And now we know everybody. But at the time, Walt wanted to preserve the magic of these characters. And she, in fact, was not able to get much work because of her distinct voice. Walt didn't want it to be in anything else and for the illusion of Snow White to be broken. You can hear her in a few singing roles, some kind of side parts of The Wizard of Oz and It's a Wonderful Life. And she did some other chorus and little tiny bit parts in other films. And she continued to perform in operas later in life, particularly Rigoletto was one that I found that she performed in. She did a lot of Snow White voice work when she was still alive. And she even re-recorded I'm Wishing for the Wishing Well at Disneyland, which I find really cool that that's not the original audio. She re-recorded that. So next time you're at the Wishing Well at Disneyland, take time to sit and listen and appreciate if you have time. She appeared on many other shows, like the Julie Andrews Show and other kind of talk shows and variety shows, to talk about her experiences. So if you want to find those, you absolutely can. She is an incredible performer and an incredible person. And she was invited to audition and was the first to audition for the film. And she was invited after the casting director for the film called her father. Her father was a vocal coach at the time, and she overheard the conversation and she got so excited. And in an interview, she said that she put on her best voice and she was invited to audition. And I think that that's such an interesting story. And she eventually got the part against hundreds of other performers. And Lucille Laverne plays the queen. And she was a silent film actress. And despite the fact that many at Disney were concerned that she was too old for the part, she auditioned and her smooth voice just fit the role perfectly. And she also auditioned for the witch form of the queen, but because of her voice, she was told it was too smooth and not raspy enough until she took out her false teeth, and then she killed it. And she created cinema, I guess. This was her final performance before she passed away in 1945, and this is her most well-known role. In my research, I found that the other characters don't really have much of a story on their auditions, but Sneezy's story is really interesting. Sneezy is played by Billy Gilbert, and he had read about the casting in a Variety article, and being known for his signature sneeze, he decided to audition. After hearing his sneezing routine, the casting directors casted him on the spot. And Albert Herder was the supervisor for the art direction of the film. Due to his academic art training, he was instrumental in facilitating the Germanic look of the film. And how this was executed was by incorporating European painting and drawing techniques into the animation. To make the animation of the characters look more realistic, the animators took anatomy classes and movement classes taught by Professor Don Graham. Although it started with human anatomy and movement, some animal anatomy and movement was studied as well to round out their studies, because most of the animators had not received formal training. And so because of this, these classes were described as a brutal battle. But because of the enthusiasm from both sides of it, both the animators and Graham, it was enjoyable and beneficial because they wanted to learn these things. Because like I said, they were not formally trained. And Graham would often screen shorts that the animators had worked on and kind of critique it and be like, the animal wouldn't move that way. What are you talking about? Or even like praise it and be like, this is funny, this is good, and kind of give critiques on how they could be better and more natural in how these things worked. Grim Natwick, who is known for animating Betty Boop, showed a better sense of female anatomy, and due to this, he was given the primary task of animating Snow White. He had previously animated the Goddess of Spring in a Silly Symphony cartoon, and so he had the expertise to animate Snow White, and that's why he was trusted with this task. A technique that was used a lot in Snow White was rotoscoping, which is a practice where scenes are acted out by live actors as references for the animation, and then they use those filmed scenes as reference and they will draw over it. Every scene was shot live with actors for the option to be rotoscoped. Some animators did utilize the rotoscoping. However, some animators did not approve of it and felt that it was spitting on animators, I guess you could say, and distrustful. But it can be helpful in scenes where anatomy is needed. My husband personally thinks you can tell in every scene with the Queen, and I would agree, especially the poison apple scene. I think you can tell. I personally think the silly song scene is very big, and you can see that. I think the other thing is I have seen pictures of when they rotoscoped the silly song scene. Rotoscoping will continue to be used in other Disney projects, and I will probably mention them in future videos. The ink and paint department found it quite difficult to add blush to Snow White and the Queen because for ink in those animated cells, they were very pigmented. And so if you tried to make a rosy colored blush or like any other makeup, it would just look like a dot, like a Nutcracker style dot on their face or above their eye. It would be very, very pigmented. And despite the rumors, and I had heard this, and I guess that this wasn't true, they did not use blush. Ink and paint employee Helen Auger found the solution of using dye on a piece of cotton. So they dip cotton in dye, and then they put it on the end of a pencil, and they would blot it onto the cell. And it was so time-consuming that they never used the technique again. I can only imagine, like, for Pinocchio or something, Walt coming in and being like, we need to have the blue fairy have these rosy cheeks, and the ink and paint girls be like, ugh. Like, I can imagine that they said, we gotta figure out something else, because we're never going to do this again. I cannot imagine how many hours it took to add, because Snow White is in almost every frame of this movie, and every single frame they had to add this blush, not only to Snow White but to the Queen when she's not in the witch form. So I can't imagine how long that took. If anybody knows anybody who might know that information, please let me know, because that would be fascinating to me. Walt Disney had to mortgage his house in order to make this film, and when he needed another loan from the bank, he simply showed a rough cut to the bank executive. And the bank executive said, quote, "Walt, that thing is going to make a hatful of money." And then the loan was approved. Which is funny because it made a hatful of money adjusted for inflation. And that's not even including the international release. RKO, the studio that distributed Snow White, which I mentioned earlier as having the rights to Babes in Toyland, I don't exactly know how RKO and Disney decided on distributing, but you will find that a lot of early Disney movies are distributed by RKO before Disney had the money to distribute them themselves. RKO reported that it made $7,846,000 in the international box office. And if that was in 1938 money, because international release wasn't until 1938, in today's money, that would be $179,490,326.67 in 2025 when I'm recording this video, which, wow, combine that with the initial grossing of the premiere and opening and everything, that's crazy. And that doesn't even account for DVD, VHS, movie re-releases. And so then we see that at the time it was the most successful sound movie of all time, but that would be surpassed by Gone with the Wind in 1939, so only 2 years later. In 1993, it became the first film to be entirely digitized, manipulated, and recorded back into film entirely in 4K. This movie has been praised by almost any company you can think of: Variety, the New York Times. Rolling Stone ranked it number 4 in the greatest animated movies of all time. But a South Park movie was also on that list. And so I'd maybe take that Rolling Stone article with a grain of salt. You can fight me all you want. I've never been a South Park person. There's nothing worse than a Marvel person, but maybe a South Park person. You can fight me on that. But Snow White is incredible, and its influence not only to the Disney company, but animation and cinema as a whole is felt. Okay. So, first thing, on Disney Plus, it's called the greatest animated film of all time. I think that's what other people have called it. Personally, for me, I'm biased in different ways. One, this isn't my favorite Disney movie. But also, two, this isn't, like, I am not a modern, I don't know, I wouldn't say I'm not a modern Disney girly, but I am really much more lenient towards the classics. It's what I grew up with. And so this one for me is definitely higher up. Just for that reason, I think it has a lot of just heart, and it is, I think, as a Disney historian, as a self-proclaimed Disney historian, I think it has that history behind it that just makes it so much more powerful to me.
What I was going to say for me, while I had not seen it before, and I did not grow with a lot of these older ones, I still liked it, mainly because a lot of it is just harmless, fun, just standard, they lived happily ever after, once upon a time style story. And so I think because of that, if I were to rank it, I know the ranking's based on you, that's important, but I would put it either high B or low A. Is where I was
going to say the same thing. I was going to say either A or B. It definitely isn't S, but I definitely wouldn't put it, so for our rankings, I would either put it in Bareness. I would actually put it in Walt approved, because that's what our A tier is called. So I definitely think that we should put it in Walt approved, because it is Walt's baby.
I would say either. I understand its importance, and it has very beautiful music, and it has a lot of personality. But I feel like for me personally, when I want to see a film or a movie like this, I like my characters with more depth. Especially like the prince. You mentioned before that they had more planned to do with the prince, but then they just got sick and tired of animating him. And you can kind of tell when you watch it, where the prince kind of just shows up at the end, solves everyone's problems, and then they lived happily ever after.
I can't remember why he was difficult to animate for Snow White's prince. I just know that he was, so he's only in 2 scenes for that reason.
Well, I kind of agree with that. The other thing I pointed out while we were watching is obviously we should let Snow White be Snow White as a film, but when you kind of pointed out the intention they had with the prince initially, it made me almost kind of think a little bit like that Sleeping Beauty was kind of like the reattempt at Snow White. Not like the story itself, because they used a different story as the reference, right? The story of Sleeping Beauty. But a lot of the tropes, a lot of the character mood kind of carries over. The Evil Queen is almost exactly 1-to-1 with Maleficent, at least just on a surface level. Obviously, when you dig more, there's more depth to both of their characters, but just from the basic idea, they're very, very, very similar, and you can even kind of see the same between Aurora and Snow White. A lot of similarities between them as characters, but I feel like if I had to choose between them, I feel like Aurora does it a little bit better. And I know, of course, this isn't meant to compare them, but that was something we had talked about that I had thought of.
Future video coming. Sleeping Beauty is probably going to be an S tier for both of us. It holds a place in both of our hearts. At least for me, it holds a place in my heart. So I think Sleeping Beauty is going to be an instant S tier for me, and that's just how it's going to be. Snow White, to me, is just I can see people being annoyed by Snow White. And maybe it's just my opera background. I don't think she's annoying. I think she's just a soprano and 14 years old.
Yeah, I didn't really see any problems with the way her character was or the way she sang or anything like that. So, like I said, I thought it was just mostly just harmless classic Disney. So that's why I don't think I would really rank it negatively.
And the thing that I think that people have a problem with this movie, I think what sparked me wanting to do this in particular and be crazy and be insane and watch 118 Disney animated movies is I saw someone on TikTok, they were going and they were ranking these Disney movies, and they put Snow White in D tier, and that made me very angry because I think when you know this history and you know that Walt mortgaged his house for this movie to pay for this movie and that it was such a gamble. And I thought I saw something on the internet, and I will fact check myself on this, but I thought I saw something that said that adjusted for inflation, this is still the highest grossing animated movie of all time, or is in the top 10 highest grossing animated movies of all time.
Maybe animated, that might make sense. I might see that. I don't know about in just movie period, because I know like Marvel's stuff usually is probably on there. I know Titanic was really, really big. But that's a different can of worms for a different day. But still.
I haven't seen Titanic, so if you want to see Titanic, watch me watch Titanic.
Well, can we wait till we do the other 100 and something Disney movies? We don't need to make plans yet.
I know. But to me, it's just hard to see people disrespect the history in the ways that, I don't know, I feel like some modern Disney fans do. Like, if I went back to that person's page, I bet, like, all of the classics are, like, C to F, and, like, the Renaissance films onward is, like, B to A.
I bet they'd probably be like, Avengers Endgame was the best movie that's ever been made. Humanity writing had peaked at Marvel. We have never gone better since, and I would just want to strangle them on the spot.
We are chill with Marvel. We're not chill with Marvel fans, though.
Yeah.
I will say, Marvel fans in this household should not feel safe. But I will say, like, they should have ended after Endgame. WandaVision was cool, but after WandaVision, it just went... But, yeah.
My child can be gay, they can be an atheist, they can be whatever the heck they want, but Lord help them if they are a Marvel fan.
Anyway, Snow White is a classic, and I would highly recommend checking it out. Of course, it's on Disney+. I find it weird that they never gave it a sequel. I think because they just didn't want to touch it. It's so sacred. Like, they gave, like, everyone and their mother
That's honestly a fair point.
a Disney sequel. They didn't make Sleeping Beauty one either, though. Like, I find it interesting.
Maybe it's just the early ones.
Well, Cinderella has 2 sequels.
I guess that's
Bambi
true.
has one. I don't know. It's weird.
Did Dumbo ever get one?
No, that one's shocking to me, too. Dumbo did get a weird TV show, though.
A TV show?
A weird, like, live-action circus TV show. It was really interesting.
Okay.
I can talk about that after I finish my
could do the
118 movies.
That's for the Dumbo episode.
Yeah. Maybe I'll do research for that for the Dumbo episode. But for now, it's Snow White. I highly recommend it. The trailer on Disney Plus was actually really cool.
Very pretty.
Really pretty. And it made me think that maybe they did it for another movie, and I went and checked Pinocchio. They didn't do it for Pinocchio. So, just probably ripped the Pinocchio one from, like, a DVD trailer or something. I don't know. But it is worth it. I'd say if you have about an hour and a half to kill and you want to scratch that Disney nostalgic itch, I'd say absolutely.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. The soundtrack's beautiful.
And especially if you have kids, it's harmless Disney fun.
Oh, the dwarfs are funny. We
Yeah.
we were laughing a lot, and I'd say we are pretty childish in our humor, but I'd say we're also sophisticated, but, like, stuff like Dopey eating the soap and coughing up soap bubbles is just classic.
I think for me, part of it you need to realize is for something like this, Walt was writing this with the intention of it being for families rather than like specifically for kids. And so like I understand why even though we as adults can still kind of find joy in it. It's just harmless, wholesome joy is all that a lot of it is, and a lot of its humor is just kind of just fun. It's just fun. That's a lot of it. Fun in a good way. So it's something that you can just enjoy and just spend some time with your kids and watch the funny dwarves do the funny dwarf thing, and Snow White be the well, for lack of a better term, the straight man in the household, to kind of help put things together.
Dude, when she was like, this house is dirty, I was like, yeah. It looked like they hadn't cleaned for like 10 years, and it was just, I will say, drop your cynical adultness and watch this film, because it is just, it's just pure fun. It was written during the Great Depression, and so I think it really invokes that movies to escape, because it's after the Great Depression when people wanted to just repair and go back to normal. And I think it's just pure lighthearted fun. Don't think about it too much. Also, if you want my opinion, I'm going to drop this at the end. The prince and Snow White knew each other before. That's not their first meeting. Because she's saying, I'm wishing for the one I love to find me today. Meaning, it like kind of like, in my opinion, implying that she's already met him before.
That's one way. I kind of see it a different way. We were actually talking about this during the movie. Right, the story of Snow White, while obviously the version that they made is different from the original German, folk tale, but to me, if that detail carried over, again, I haven't read the original, so I don't actually know, but honestly, to me, I could see them first meeting being, like, symbolic of, like, an arranged marriage, of like, which would be foreign to us today, but back then was totally normal of, the marriage is arranged, and rather than falling in love, you make love in your relationship and you build a relationship rather than building a relationship before you get married. And so it makes sense to have some type of scene like that where they've barely known each other, but they still love each other so much and they choose to build that relationship. Again, to us, that's so weird and that's so foreign, but I would presume, again, assuming this is all in the original story, I guess this is where Emma facts checked me, but assuming that this stuff's in the original story, it kind of makes sense for even if they had never met before, it's a cultural thing that we just are separated by time.
Yeah, and I personally think that with going off of my theory, because I also think that his theory could have plausibility, but if we're going off of my theory, I think that her, like, getting scared and rushing into the house during that scene is much more of a, she's gonna catch you and she's not gonna like you, rather than a I'm frightened by you because I do not know you. And I think that might be a remnant of that deleted scene where he was supposed to be captured by the evil queen, but I'm not sure. Anyway, but I think that, another thing that I want to address, which is a Snow White opinion that we've talked about before, like recently, is that the prince at the end, because it is shown that they love each other at this point, which a lot of people can argue, but it's a fairy tale.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be... it doesn't, it's so romanticized. It is go with it, I feel like modern, like, rom-coms for someone, and don't get me wrong, I love the rom-coms where they truly get to know each other. An element of these fairy tale moments and these fairy tales is, a part of it is nonsensical and a part of it is suspending your disbelief. So to me personally, I just feel that just being a realist and cynical about how long a couple has known each other is just really, I don't know. it's a fairy tale.
That's something possible. I mean, that's pretty much how it was for us. We practically almost fell in love with each other right off the bat. So, like, it's not like this type of thing is that unrealistic.
Yeah, there is such thing as connecting very quickly. Like, it happens, and it can be okay, and it can breed the grounds of healthy relationships still.
And, of course, in it, they're probably over-dramatizing it. It kind of makes me think of, like, Frozen, where they're almost poking fun of the fact of how quickly they fell in love with each other. I feel like it's probably kind of the same thing, and that's okay. It's a fairy tale. It's supposed to be like a quick run-through of the background so that you understand the set pieces of the prince and Snow White and their relationship without needing to go through the whole, rom-com relationship where they have their third act trouble and then they won't.
Oh, I hate that.
Instead, it is just they love each other so much and they want to do anything for each other. And so the prince goes through his quest. I mean, it says at the end of the movie, even despite the prince not being much around, it says that he was searching for her and that, he finally hears about this maiden who's been trapped in a glass coffin and goes to see her, and then that's when the ending comes.
Which I don't remember that part, but I have not watched this movie since I was a kid, and I probably could not read. So I will admit, and I will concede that I probably did not remember that part because I could not read it.
Sure.
But for the last thing is a lot of people have said, I think that, and I hate to be so like this, I think that millennials ruined the internet. One of the reasons that I think millennials ruined the internet is they took these Disney movies, so like stuff like, I don't know, it's stuff like saying Ballad Stockholm Syndrome, and I might talk about that in my Beauty and the Beast video. The kisses with Sleeping Beauty and Snow White are not consensual. And here's where I'm going to say no. Because I don't know if the prince found out, because it does say that he searched for her. So I don't know if the prince found out that a kiss could save her.
That's true.
But I also, even if not, I still think she was dead. It was a kiss goodbye.
Yeah. Well, the other thing is, like, I don't know. Between, like, that and Sleeping Beauty, I don't find it too different from when I, like, give you a kiss in the morning when you wake up or something. And you're sleepies and eepies in the bed and you're not wanting to get up and you're just all bundled up in your blanket in a cocoon. And I just give you a little kiss because you're being cute. And then, obviously, you may have not directly consented to that kiss, but, like, is true love... Especially at this point when we're married, I hope it's true love, Like, it makes me assume that this is part of our relationship and normal. And so while in their relationships, it may not have been the norm, but I feel like the implication is that they've loved each other to this extent that this is okay,
And I probably will still possibly get comments that say, oh, it was still not consent. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it in my comment section. And I don't care. And I will just say that because I personally believe that you have not watched the movie if you believe that.
Or, alternatively, you just need to learn more about media literacy. It's okay to struggle with that. A lot of people struggle with that.
That was the nicest way to say do research and
No, I mean it's true. A lot of people struggle with media literacy. It's like the saying of common sense isn't that common. Media literacy is the same way. I was growing up really confused about all types of stories because I didn't understand them. And then someone said, "Well, why didn't you just read the story?" And I was like, you kind of have that moment like the gif of the dude who's looking at the computer and he's like, oh, right. And the other dude's pointing at it or whatever. Where it kind of feels almost sarcastic. But then they kind of had like a point, You just like need to learn to have the retention for some of the lesser noticed parts of the story that are meant to give meaning to these scenes. The showing and not telling, as they might call it.
Yeah, and I think that media literacy is... I don't want this to be a whole media literacy conversation, so I think we'll just end it there. But I think that this movie... But I think that Snow White is a time, and I think you should watch it just to kind of feel like the older stuff. When I watch it, it just makes me feel close to Walt, and I don't know how to describe it. It just makes me feel close to his energy and his presence. Some of y'all in the comments will say that Walt is a bad person. I don't really want to hear that. A lot of that stuff is either like product of his time or just plain old wrong, and I don't know how to tell y'all that.
It's also just like, you can also admit, like, obviously I don't know the specifics and circumstances people would be referring to, but like, it's okay to admit that a person may have done a bad thing in their life and still overall produced good in the world. You know, a lot of people point to like Mother Teresa. Well, Mother Teresa, I'm 99% sure, was a Catholic, which to some people is basically the same as being an absolute horrible person, and to others it's the same as being a saint, right? But I think most people can agree, whether your opinion on her background is she did good and she was generally a good person. And the same flips on the coin for evil people, and the same flips on the coin for normal people. You know, you're not good, you're not bad, you're just nice. You know, it affects for everybody on that spectrum.
And I'll talk about this in my Song of the South video. Like, I do not condone, and maybe all the other videos that kind of have cultural appropriation in them, I do not condone the cultural appropriation that was customary for the time. Like, I do not condone it at all. And I disagree with the fact that that Disney has buried Song of the South. I'll talk about that in my Song of the South video probably. I disagree with the fact that it has been buried purely for educational content. It's kind of the same, like, to me, it's like if you buried Gone with the Wind, just because it has that kind of content in it. But I'll talk about that more in that video.
Yeah, I was like, that's more for when we get to those movies and stuff to talk more about that. But the point still stands of, like, you know, overall good people can do bad things and overall bad people can do good things, you know?
I think that Snow White is good, and I think that it is... I love the music. If you're not a classical music person, this might not be the movie for you. It is very old and very classical. But if it is not the movie for you, please don't diss this movie. It is as much as it all started with a mouse, it also started with a German girl. A 14-year-old German princess who just wished for her prince. Do you have any closing remarks?
Hi-ho, 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 hi-ho. It's off to work we go.
Okay, that's enough of that because that's completely off key and I don't want to be copyright claimed. Okay, goodbye, everyone.